by default, right, under the HIPAA laws, your data is your data, regardless of who has access to it, where is it stored, how it's being stored, et cetera. If you have a breach, right, and it's through a third party that hosts your practice management software, it's still your problem, right? It's still your patient data. It's your responsibility. So a lot of doctors don't understand that. They think, hey, if there's a breach and ABC cloud practice management software is hosting my data, it's all their problem. And that's just not what the law says.
Hello there, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Orthopreneurs Podcast. Today, I have somebody here who's going to try to save you some money. He's not going to give you a discount. Well, he might give you a discount, right? Mystery guest, you might give them a discount.
It could happen. You never know.
It could happen.
Yeah.
And he's not going to get you free goods, but he's going to save you money by preventing you from having to potentially spend some of your hard-earned money to solve a online problem that was caused by a malicious attack or a malicious intent. Let's leave it at that. So please, welcome to the Orthopreneurs Podcast today, Gary Salman. What would be your title, Gary, at Black Talon? Are you CEO and founder? Are you founder?
Yeah, I'm CEO and co-founder.
CEO and co-founder at Black Talon. I've been a very happy client in the past. I have no financial interest in the company whatsoever, but I will scream from the rooftops that you need to have these people in your life. And if you don't understand why, we're going to dive into it today. So Gary, as I ask everybody, give us about 90 seconds or so, or a minute or two, of how you ended up doing what you do today and what exactly that is.
Sure. So I have pretty deep roots in the dental space. My dad's a recently retired oral surgeon back in the early 90s. While I was in school, planning on becoming an oral surgeon, my dad came to me with this genius idea. He was like, hey, there's really no oral surgery specific practice management software. Why don't we design some together? And long story short, I ended up switching my major from pre-med to business and computers and literally just taught myself to code.
And you and I joke about how our lives are actual opposites. Because I started off as computer science and ended up going, my dad was a dentist as well, but I started as computer science in 1984 and started learning to code and go through all that and then ended up going into dentistry. You wanted to go into dentistry and then ended up coding.
Yeah, exactly. So, we took two different paths. Maybe we crossed at some point. Who knows?
You never know.
Yeah, both in New York, right? Were anyway. Yeah. So basically I just taught myself to code and started engineering this practice management software designed specifically for oral surgeons. And then actually by my senior year, I had about 40 OMS practices across the country that I was supporting and kind of built up a pretty sizable company. And I'd be hopping on planes and not going to class to trade shows and things like that. My professors were awesome. They all, supported it. And then I kind of had this vision back in the late 90s. And I said to myself, why are we selling servers? What about, it wasn't even called cloud back then, but what about putting the data up in some data centers and having these practices use the data up there and run the software up there? So we ended up building out a data center here in New York. And by the time we were done, like 2002, we had about 2,500 OMS users running our practice management software through the internet. And we didn't even have super high speed internet back then. I mean, some people had basic DSL connections, but very, very effective solution. And actually that was my first introduction to cybersecurity because we actually had an attempted attack on the system and it wasn't ransomware back then. It was, more intrusions and things like that. So right. I think that's really what sparked my interest. Then I actually ended up selling the company and worked for another company for many years in the orthodontic and oral surgery space. And then, then I started getting introduced to it again, where practices were calling me and saying, hey, I got hit with ransomware. Can you guys help us? And then I just really started connecting the dots and said, hey, there's a need here. That why are so many practices being hit with ransomware? So I got together with a bunch of really smart cybersecurity folks from Wall Street and large, Fortune 100-ish companies. And we spun up Black Talon to try and help small businesses, mostly in healthcare right now, protect themselves from ransomware and data theft. Yeah,
it's amazing. Now, let's start off with something you taught me early on that I've got, I'm going to push your buttons because like an orthodontist hears someone come into their office and say, oh, I'm going to get clear aligners from my general dentist. He knows what he's doing, right? Like every orthodontist out there just like cringes all of a sudden. Hey, Gary, I'm totally protected. I got an IT guy.
Right.
For those of you not watching, he's not smiling.
No.
And so, I just want to set this one up. Let's just say my brother is an IT guy extraordinaire. He assures me that I've got a firewall that protects me so well, and there's no way anybody's going to get into my secure space, if you will. Why do I need Black Talon? And before anybody knows, I have no financial interest, as I said, but I know the answer he's going to give because he's been nice enough to train my team. Hint, hint, that's part of the conversation here. So please, Gary, why should I even consider Black Talon when I have an amazing IT person who assures me I've got an amazing impenetrable firewall?
Right. So I think you started going down this path, right? Orthodontists are specialists. They can take, a GP can take a 2-hour course or a weekend course, and all of a sudden they too can do orthodontics. In the IT world, in the cyber world, unfortunately, we experience the same things, right? You have IT companies that are probably awesome at what they do, right? They keep the computers up and running. They provide you with new technology. Mary at the front desk has a problem. They call help desk and they get it fixed. But in terms of cyber, you really need to deal with people who specialize in this, right? That do it 365 days a year, that are board certified, credentialed, et cetera. And then really what the most important part is what's called a third-party assessment. Because if you go to your IT person, and Dr. Krieger, you kind of said this already, and they assure you that you're being properly protected, how do you actually know that? Do you just trust them?
Right.
Okay, that's a thought. That's fine, right? If you just want to trust, that's okay. But what validation do you have to actually say, hey, my firewall's configured properly. My computers aren't going to be, the victim of an attack. My employees are properly trained. Without third-party validation, all you're doing is basing a life decision, right? Because when you get hit with these cyber attacks, it changes your life. You're basing a life decision on what someone's telling you, not an independent authority. And if you look at what risk management companies are saying, if you look at even what the insurance companies are saying that provide cyber coverage, they're all starting to ask the question, do you have a third-party cybersecurity company assessing your vulnerabilities and assessing your network? Because they're no longer just going to take an application that says my IT company does this and provide coverage from a cyber perspective. So if you think about what they're doing and why they're doing it, it's because it's based on probably the payouts, right? How many, billions of dollars in claims they paid out over the years. And now they're starting to realize, hey, if this stuff was assessed by a third party, maybe our claim rate would be a lot lower. So we're starting to see that occur as well. The specialization and then the true third-party assessments, and then just really, a trusted source, someone that does this 365 days a year, that you can come to and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I want to implement in my practice. What are the pros and cons? My IT vendor is saying I need this type of, security solution, et cetera. What do you guys think? And we have no skin in the game, right? We don't sell any of that stuff. So we'll provide, true kind of quote unquote Switzerland, type, feedback. So, and actually, Dr. Krieger, outside of the dental space, this is the norm, right? Businesses, right. Healthcare entities, right? They're getting third-party assessments done all the time. They're not just having, a generalist do the security.
Right, exactly. And there's more to it that I know even you didn't add, which was, is your IT specialist sitting down with your team and telling them, hey, all right, team, we have a great firewall, but hey, Susie, last week you found that thumb drive. You were at the AAO meeting and you saw a thumb drive on the ground and you picked it up and you put it in the computer. Oh, and by the way, when you did that, you installed ransomware on all of our system. And now someone can backdoor and break in whatever they want to do. Like just informing your team, which I felt was really important, was just explaining to them, number one, what you should and should not be doing in best practices, right? And how they could be the weak link in the entire system. I'm not talking about someone being malicious and trying to steal your database themselves. I'm referring to just innocuously opening up a website.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, It's a huge issue. And a lot of cyber attacks can be attributed to a user mistake, right? Sally at the front desk or Dr. Mary Stein just making a mistake, right? They accidentally click on a link that they think is from the GP down the street, or a vendor or supplier. And then boom, within minutes, they're the victim of a ransomware or cyber event too. So it is critical that staff is trained, and it's not like, hey, let's have a pizza party today, and I'm going to tell you not to click on anything, right? That's not really training. So sitting down with your staff and just telling them not to do things doesn't really work. But having a formalized program, A, it's required under HIPAA, right? You have to do this annually. And then B, it is really considered best practices. And our data shows, Dr. Krieger, somewhere between like 60 and 70% of most cyber attacks are the result of an employee action. Them clicking on something, opening something, visiting a website that is potentially malicious. And then sometimes they just get caught in scams, right? They think they're going to a legit website and they end up giving up information, usernames, passwords, right, things like that. And then all of a sudden, to your point, you can have the best firewall in the world and the best antivirus software, but when one of your employees gives up their login credentials to their network, to their cloud technology, to the practice management software, it's pretty much game over.
Oh, yeah. I suspect. And it's funny because some of these phishing scams, like, it's like the spelling is so bad on some of them that, like, how do you fall for it? But they do. And the URLs that they go to are so not, like, if you're going to QuickBooks, it's usually QuickBooks or Intuit.com. It is not, X7TPV dot, right? Like, exactly. Chances are, if American Express is saying, hey, we need you to log into your account and give us your info just to verify some suspicious activity, and you click on the link and it doesn't take you to AmericanExpress.com, but instead takes you to, like I said, v7db.info. Chances are it's not American Express. But I know what people would love to hear, because I love hearing it. Can you give me a couple of interesting stories? Because what I want to get to are two things. I'd love for you to get into some of the things that you're seeing right now as big issues. I know I love hearing that from you. And I also want to sort of throw in there, we've had a little conversation about the impact of the Russia-Ukraine conflict on cyber attacks. And I don't want you to give the answer away right now, but if I were to ask people out there right now, has cyber attacks gone up, down, or stayed the same through the Russian-Ukraine conflict, you might be very surprised, because some might think, oh, they're busy doing other stuff, they're not attacking. Others would say they need cash to fund what's going on, so it's going to go up. And some would say it's just business as usual. So I want you to answer that question later, because I know the answer. But can you give me a couple of examples of some crazy scenarios you've seen recently, things that you could talk about that are everyday situations that all of us could learn from?
Yeah, so let's look at a couple different ones. I think we always believe that the attack is going to come from the outside world, like your example, Russia, Ukraine. But what happens if it comes from the inside? And maybe it's not even done maliciously. So we'll walk through a couple of these. So we did a recent event down in the Maryland, Virginia area, where they were actually a client of ours, believe it or not. And what happened here was, we had installed some very sophisticated artificial intelligence software that was designed to detect malicious activity, changes in behavior, meaning like people doing things different on the network than they usually do, as well as malicious code. So our software started popping a whole bunch of alerts in this practice, multiple locations, by the way, and started shutting down computers, right? Literally just cutting off the network connection. So we started investigating it, and we realized that these machines were under attack. Someone was trying to install crypto mining software on them to mine Bitcoin. And not only was it engineered to do Bitcoin mining, but it was also a conduit to download ransomware. So we immediately got in touch with the practice, initiated, a complete shutdown, severed the network connection, because at the time we didn't really know exactly what was going on, except it was happening. So within a short amount of time, we started to understand a little bit better that this attack was actually coming from the inside of the network, meaning it wasn't an outside attacker hitting it. It was someone in the practice moving around from computer to computer, installing the software. So we called a meeting with the practice administrator and all the doctors, and we gave them the name of the first computer that we detected. And one of the doctors immediately said, I know exactly who's doing this. So he pulled a relatively new employee in. And I said, well, before you pull her in, why do you think it's her? He said, because she goes around bragging about how tech savvy she is and she can do everything that the IT company can do, and, bragging. So we brought her in. We said,
my money is not on her. But if this was the movie Clue,
yeah,
I'm guessing it was not her doing it, because my guess is the person who's actually doing it is not bragging about how tech savvy they are. But so am I wrong?
I think you might be wrong on this one.
You're usually always right. Foiled again, Gary Salman.
I know. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to embarrass you there.
Oh, so, no, it's okay. Nobody's. Yeah, but yeah. like you're the most tech savvy person who's going to steal money from everybody, and I'm going to brag about it.
Oh, but that's what criminals sometimes do, right? They're not the smartest criminals.
I'm sorry for interrupting. So he brought her in.
Yeah, he brought her in, and we did a video call. And he introduced us to her. And then I asked a couple of questions, and she instantly admitted. She's like, yes, I was installing the Bitcoin mining software because there's so many computers here, in the evening and on the weekends, I wanted to make extra money by using the computing power to mine Bitcoin.
So she didn't view it as a malicious hack.
Right.
She was just like, yeah, the electricity you're paying to mine, it shouldn't be my problem. It's your problem. But
right.
Nobody's using the computers, so whatever. And so what was the conduit to malware? What did she have to do with that?
So basically, she didn't download as being as tech savvy as she thought she was. She downloaded a piece of malicious code that was basically a cover for mining Bitcoin, but was really designed to talk to what's called a command and control server, which is a server in a foreign country, usually like Russia, Ukraine, etc., that wakes up at a predetermined time, communicates from the workstation in the dental practice back to the command and control server. And then it says, hey, what do you want me to do? I'm sitting here waiting for, orders, right? We're being a little sarcastic, but then the command and control server sends it orders, and it could be downloading ransomware code. So a lot of times we see things like this. We've seen ortho practices download what they think is QuickBooks, right? And it's a piece of malicious code. So anyway, long story short, the doctor basically fired her on the spot. We were able to clean up the machines and get them back up and running within a couple hours. But a lot of times,
and of course, she didn't pay for that.
No, yeah, of course not, right? You're talking 3 locations down for about half a day. They lost some serious dollars on that for being, and obviously all the turmoil. But, we always talk about the hackers from foreign countries, but sometimes it's from the inside also. We've dealt with tons and tons of ransomware cases. I would say this is really the first time I've seen kind of that inside attack where, to your point, she wasn't really trying to be malicious. She just didn't really know what she was doing. But it could have been, a significant event. If the ransomware code had executed and the artificial intelligence didn't intercept it in time, right? There's no software that's 100%. You could have had, 60 computers down between 3 locations. So that was kind of ugly.
And a question for you. So once the code has been, this is the part where I get confused.
Right.
So she installs the code. It's a conduit for malicious code.
Mm-hmm.
How do you shut off? How does the AI shut it off?
Right.
Because if you're on the internet and the code is there, it should be at the speed of processing power or the speed of electrical transmission. How does the AI shut it down before it actually creates, or does it actually create the gateway, but the AI shuts it down before it has the ability to actually do anything back?
Right. So great question. So typically what happens is, let's take the example of an orthodontist visiting a website that's infected with malicious code. What happens is when you visit that website and that web server that
I've never done that, by the way, Gary. They can't prove it. It wasn't me. I
exactly.
I never went.
That's a whole funny discussion we can have if we have time at the end about what we monitor and what we don't monitor. You can imagine the questions we get asked.
Oh, yes. I have no doubt.
Maybe for a different audience.
No, I mean, it's, this is an adult podcast. We're not sitting here cursing. I will tell you, I knew a guy who once, and it wasn't me, I swear to you, it wasn't me, was coming back from a foreign country, and he had like a couple of joints in his bag. Mm-hmm. And he got to the it's a funny story because you appreciate this. He got to the airport and he saw all these dogs sniffing around. I think it was Mexico they were coming from, and these dogs were sniffing everywhere. And he turned to the cop and he said, what are they sniffing for? And the cop said, don't worry, it's bombs. You're okay. And
not the first time the cop had that question.
No. So I guess, you shouldn't be too embarrassed about the questions people are asking you, because chances are that you've been asked it many times.
No doubt. We absolutely have.
And so anyway, doctor goes to a website, thinks he's downloading QuickBooks, or some program for the office, or just any program, right? And thinks that it's safe, but in fact it's malware. What's happening?
So what can happen is, if they have this AI technology, it's known as extended detection and response. There are a couple different brand names that produce this technology. So what the AI actually does is it intercepts the executable as it's downloading into the system and basically holds it there. And using its AI, it analyzes the code. And it says to itself, hey, is there anything in this code that appears to be malicious? And the way it does this is by taking information, transmitting it back to like supercomputers and neural network. And then that information in a fraction of a second comes back and either says, hey, this appears to be legit, let it through, or this has malicious code in it or appears to be malicious, and kill it. And it intercepts it and kills it, on the fly. Versus traditional antivirus software, which is what most practices have, which has a dictionary of known threats, right? So if you download this, let's call it this malicious executable that someone created to look like QuickBooks. If that malicious executable is in the dictionary for the antivirus software, it'll block it. If it's not in the dictionary, the antivirus software says, well, you're not in my dictionary. By default, you must be safe, allow. And that's how you get hit a lot of times. So the AI can think on its own, analyze the code on its own. Traditional antivirus software, which is probably what about 80 to 90% of most practices are still running, is all dictionary based. It's not very effective anymore. So it can also do behavior. So for instance, if you've never used your computer to connect to Sally's computer and then Sally's computer to connect to the server, the AI will say, hey, over the last couple of weeks, I've never seen you do this before. This is a different behavior. And then what it'll actually do is it'll sever the connection between those three machines and then alert us saying, hey, I have a behavior issue here. Dr. Krieger should not be connecting from his machine to Sally's to the server. And, I need a human to help me out to kind of look at this. And maybe it's innocuous, hey, I just need to grab some files from her machine and then go over to the server. Or most likely that's how hackers work. They jump from machine to machine, ultimately trying to get to the server. And that's why the AI, intercepted it and severed the connections. So kind of really cool technology that's out there right now that can make a difference between something that costs you a couple bucks a month and something that costs you 6+ figures.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you find, I know the person you were talking about was not malicious. She was just trying to mine some Bitcoin or Ethereum or something, right?
Yep.
But do you find employees ever maliciously, like a place where you would pick it up and, David Harris, who I love to death, is amazing at uncovering fraud in dental practices. Is there any place where your AI is going to pick that up and identify someone just stealing money or a database from a doctor's office where the doctor has no idea and the IT would never be able to figure it out?
So this type of AI that we're talking about does not really identify what's called digital loss, right? Like DLP, digital loss prevention. It's really designed to identify hacking tools, malicious code, ransomware, things like that. However, there is specific software that is available that can identify specific types of data that would leave your network, either by downloading, right, through like a remote screen share, remoting into the network, or trying to send it via email. So if someone takes certain types of data and tries to download it, the software will intercept it and alert. But I will tell you, it's pretty rare you see this in the dental space. Maybe larger DSOs may have something like this, but the problem with that software right now is it's expensive. And you're usually looking at kind of like middle to enterprise level organizations that have something like that. But unfortunately, the AI as of right now does not do that. But like all this technology, it gets cheaper to create, right, and to distribute. And like this AI that I'm talking about now, 3 or 4 years ago, you wouldn't have seen it in a dental practice. It was too expensive. But now, we're starting to see more and more of it. So I do believe in the future we'll see it.
Yeah, I mean, it's truly amazing to me, the kind of things that go on in dental practices that, you can or cannot spot, that are just, I sometimes wish like if these people came to work for me, could use their powers for good, right? Like if they could
Yeah.
only apply, apply. But again, as you said, when them using the AI, it's going to monitor everything. And so, do you actually have doctors who reach out to you and go, "Hey, I know you're monitoring everything. Have you seen X, Y, or Z?"
Right.
Um, I don't know why they're asking.
Right.
Right? If you're either seeing it or you're not, and I guess
Right.
there's no reason. But for those out there who might be scared of, hey, you know what? It's my personal computer. I know that Gary's warned me. He told me
Mhm.
not to surf the web with my office computers because I can get myself in trouble. I should only go to places that are known sites on those computers. But it's my computer. I can do what I
Yeah.
want. If I work with Black Talon, I kind of feel bad because I feel like I have Big Brother looking over my shoulder. Should
Right.
somebody be concerned about that?
So that's not something we really look at unless there's an issue. So we don't really have software that's going to tell us, you went to
Right.
xyz.com, right? That's not what we're looking for. Now, if you go to xyz.com and then xyz.com tries to download malicious software into your machine and our AI intercepts it, then we will know. Okay. But we're not like looking at your computer logs to see what websites you visited or your firewall logs. But you may say, hey, so I want to block these types of websites for my staff, but I want to be able to access these types of websites.
That'd be
It,
a weird all I'm going to say is that's a weird.
it
I guess technically, if it's clean and you say, look, I don't want my team surfing the web on my computer, so
yep.
I don't want ESPN, I don't want
Yes.
Netflix, I don't want
So,
Etsy, whatever. I could
mhm.
take them all off. Can you do that?
So you can stop access by category. So you can say, for instance, and I'm just being completely broad here, I don't want anything related to religion. And this is what some of the filters say, like religion, guns, sports, social
Politics?
media, shopping. So you can actually, a lot of firewalls allow you to go in and create kind of these broad rules that say block this. But on top of that, you can say, but I want to have access, or for a specific reason, maybe my practice administrator needs access to these certain things. So that's what businesses can do, right? They have the ability to make risk-based decisions for employees within their organization. So
Okay,
you can be as broad as you want and make sweeping rules that no one in the practice can do it. And then you can have controls in place that limit.
got it.
So, and usually when we see with security, what we see is a compromise, right? If you're so far on one side of the security of your security posture, you can't kind of function as a practice or even a human. And if
Right.
you're too far the other direction, you get hit.
Right.
So it's definitely kind of like a teeter tot that's going on.
So what about the idea that, hey, man, I'm on the cloud. I got nothing to worry about. All is
Right,
good. All computer softwares are kind of going to the cloud now. Uh, you and I talked about that earlier, about how, you were one of the first people out there to create a Windows-based cloud program for dentistry
right.
and what have you. And, we know it's been around 30 years, the idea of it, but now finally it's starting to take root and become a very common practice. If all I have are workstations for the most part and everything's on the cloud, aren't I protected? Because that's where the database is held, right?
Yeah, right.
I'm
So
asking facetiously, by the
yeah,
way.
yeah, no, I agree. I mean, that's most people think that, right? They're like, I'm just going to shift my risk to the practice management software vendor, right? I'm going to take,
Right,
I just listened to Gary lecture. I'm going to take all my data off my machines tomorrow, stick it in the cloud, and I'm going to basically do this and not my problem anymore. So,
right,
so a couple things to think about. By default, right, under the HIPAA laws, your data is your data, regardless of who has access to it, where is it stored, how it's being stored, et cetera. If you have a breach, right, and it's through a third party that hosts your practice management software, it's still your problem, right? It's still your patient data. It's your responsibility. So a lot of doctors don't understand that. They think, hey, if there's a breach and ABC cloud practice management software is hosting my data, it's all their problem, and that's just not what the law says. So we have to understand from a legal perspective. Then there's a tech perspective. Yes, in theory, right? If you're in the cloud and it's being done by a good vendor and they're having independent checks performed, which we should talk about, your data may be more secure. But I always say this: they're also a much bigger target. The hackers know where the data is, right? They're not stupid. They know some of these healthcare systems store tens of millions, hundreds of millions of records, et cetera. Just think about how many patients you have in just your practice management system, and then multiplied by 500 to 1,000 other practices that are using this practice management software. The hit's big if they get in. So the cloud is technically more secure if done properly, but understand what the cloud is. And this is where I ask a lot of doctors to answer this question. I say, what's the cloud? Who wants to take a shot at it? And of course, everyone drops their head down and no one wants to answer it, right? But the cloud is just a bunch of servers in a data center, that host your data on someone else's machines. It's not like it's, this nebulous thing where no one's ever going to find the servers. So The risk is still there. It's just being kind of pushed to another location versus being in your office. The big risk that we see, because we do a lot of ransomware attacks against ortho practices that do have cloud technology, the big risk is the endpoints, meaning the workstations in the ortho practices. So if they get hit with ransomware, let's just take two scenarios. The first scenario is they get hit with ransomware and the cloud data is secure. Okay, so that's a good scenario if it could be good, right? I never say ransomware is a good scenario, but conceptually, if your data is secure and just your workstations get hit, it's a little less painful. But when your workstations get compromised, the big thing is you can't function as an orthodontist, right? Because how do you do PANs, CEFs, cone beams, intraoral scans? How do you even get to the cloud technology when all of the workstations are basically destroyed? They've been encrypted with ransomware. The operating systems have been damaged. Sometimes they don't even boot properly. But the most important thing to understand, they've been compromised. You can't use them anymore. Right? The hackers will literally watch and monitor everything you're doing. Every patient record you open, every cloud technology you go to, every website you browse to, the hackers have capabilities of monitoring that. And that's often what we see.
Can you unplug them from the network and completely wipe them and start over? Or do they damage in any way the hardware itself through some malicious code?
Mm-hmm. So I've never seen them physically damaged, to answer your question, but the operating systems are. So the two modalities are to pull hard drives and put new hard drives in and preserve the originals for legal forensics purposes, or format the hard drives and reinstall the operating system and whatever applications you have.
That was my question.
Yeah. So that's
if you reboot and go back to the hardware, the original, OS or whatever it is, install, then it's a fresh start at that point. But you've also erased all the potential evidence.
Right. Yeah. Like this is a crime, right? Your system's been compromised. It's a breach under HIPAA. The second you get hit with ransomware, the law says it's a data breach until you prove otherwise. So that's a problem, unfortunately, we see all too often in the dental space, is the IT vendors just format all the hard drives and try and bring the doctor back up because they don't understand the rules, the laws, et cetera. And the doctors don't know either. But in fact, you're kind of violating the law by not determining whether your patient records were accessed. Forensics is really important to determine that, because what the hackers are doing is they steal your data and they publish it, right? They extort you. And that's why these ransom payments are getting larger and larger, because they know that the way they get you is through your data, right? Who wants all of their children's photographs, published and all of their information about their patients? No one. That's why most of the time the attorneys will tell the orthodontist, hey, I understand you have a viable backup, but the hacker stole your data. You still have to pay the ransom. Otherwise, they'll publish all your data. Right. And that's the issue right now that a lot of folks aren't thinking about. But
a question for you related to that. How does one know? Well, I guess, knock on wood, I've never knowingly been attacked with ransomware, right? I mean, you'd know ransomware. Malware, yes, but ransomware, you'd know because someone's asking for money.
Right.
How do you know when a ransomware attack is legit and when it's fake? And I'll follow up, meaning, I think Stephen Caution, our president, may have reached out to you last week. We got an email that basically said, "Orthopreneurs, we've got your data. We don't. I mean, what's our database? It's a bunch of doctors who've gone to Summit or something along the line. There's no real data potentially, because that's kept at Keep, which is a separate company. But if you don't pay us, we're going to destroy your reputation by systematically leaking stories about you and posts about you. How do you know when nothing's been done yet, when something's legit? Like Stephen reached out to you, and I'm sure you'll follow up with him afterwards in some sort of email. But I wanted to say this out loud so people could hear this. Like, we send it to people we know, who we trust, who goes, 99% this is totally fake. But they're just they wanted us to pay them $2,500 in Bitcoin.
Right.
Just so you know. Right. But how do you know when it's fake and how do you know when it's real? Aside from the fact that your computers are all screwed up and you can't access them and you know it's real. But I'm sure there are many who get emails ahead of time or a message ahead of time that says, hey, by the way, we have control of your computer. If you don't pay, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. Or is that not how it works?
No, that's exactly how it works. So, there are multiple types of scams. The one you're experiencing, we stole your viable business data, right? And if you don't pay us, we're going to publish it. We're going to tarnish your reputation. And then there are things like sextortion scams, which probably, at least once or twice a week, a doctor's emailing us saying they got caught in, a sextortion scam. I will tell you, except for one case, they're all just they're a scam. They typically grab like your username, a password that may have been compromised on a website. It could have been just a shopping website that you buy clothes at and they got hacked. And then what the hackers do is they just send you a email saying, we caught you on a webcam. You were visiting, a horrible site. And if you don't pay us, we're going to publish all the photographs of you that we took, of you while you were watching this website. And 99.
And the website that they're claiming is not Kmart.com.
Right. It's not. Yeah.
No, but and again, it's pure speculation on their behalf that we saw you at sexyorthodontist.com or something, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But if out of 100 people, 99 have never gone to that website, it just, they're doing numbers, right? They're going for big numbers. But sorry.
No, you're right. No, I mean, sometimes it's a generic email where they don't actually define what website you went to, and then others they may just pick some, right? Like, common ones that some people may go to, right? And then
those not watching, he's just laughing.
Exactly, right. Rhymes with horn, right?
Yeah.
I've actually had orthodontists call me and they're like, I don't go to this, but I don't want to risk it. I'm just going to pay them $2,500. I'm like, all right, let's understand why you want to do that. And like, let's just be honest with one another. If you really have, that's fine. I don't judge, right? We all do things. And sometimes
what about the sextortion?
Yeah. Yes. So sextortion is when they accuse you of basically going to pornography websites and then they take pictures of you through your webcam while you're watching the porn videos.
Oh, I think there's an episode of Black Mirror that had something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really common.
Sextortion. So that's not photos of an individual engaging in some sexual act that they're trying to push out there, which is a totally different level of security, because one is they hacked a website. Another is they hacked your own computer.
That's what they claim. They turn on the webcam, they turn on the microphone, they took pictures of you doing things to yourself while watching pornography.
Got it. Anthony Weiner-esque sort of situation on our hands.
Yep.
But what about the situation where it has nothing to do with sex, has nothing to do with a website? I get a message, hey, orthopreneurs, we've taken, they showed a Keep logo, which is Keep is, for those who don't know, that's a very famous database company that's sort of the gold standard in the industry, who manage databases so that I know who's attending Summit, I know who's attending this Orthopreneurs University course, and they send it to you like we've been to Keep, we've got your data, et cetera, et cetera. How do you know? I mean, we use Keep. It's a real legitimate website. We've done it. They haven't given us any validating data to prove that they've actually hacked us. Like, show me the ear, give me a finger, show me the paper in front of them.
Exactly. So that's really the approach that we would probably take, is like, that's great. You can make these accusations, but prove it. So I will tell you, most of the time when hackers steal data, they will immediately shove it back in your face. They'll be like, hey, you don't believe me? Here's your data. Here's some photographs. Here's some x-rays. Here's a health history form. And often you don't even have to ask for it, because they know that that's what's going to generate the payment a majority of the time.
Got it.
They don't have the data. They may be a little less likely to make statements like that. But if you go back to them and say, hey, prove that you have the data, and if they can't, then they probably don't. That's their modus operandi. It's almost like proof of life, right?
Right, exactly. I want to see someone's ear. I want to see their feet.
Yep.
Like, I don't want you to cut their ear off. But like, but when they send an ear in the mail to say, hey, we've got your loved one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or, here's a newspaper article in front of them showing today's news. Like, there's some proof of life somewhere. But is there, my first inclination is just to ignore the email and not respond, because then they know they've got a real person. Mm-hmm. Is it suggested that if you think it's real, to just write back and go, hey, thank you for the email, but can you offer us some proof that you actually have our database? Or are you causing more problems by doing that?
I think if you're not trained in these types of negotiations, right? Because it's literally almost like a hostage situation, right? Right. They have something of yours potentially. You may have to give them something, and there has to be potential exchange of goods. You could get yourself into some trouble. Often the way you communicate with these guys is by having to go to the dark web. So if you're not familiar with how to do that, when you try and use your computer inappropriately to get on the dark web, you could, become a victim again. So usually I say engage with a cyber company that specializes in extortion. And they often have intelligence databases. They can look at email addresses, threat groups, which is really like the gangs. They all have like their own like kind of symbols or logos and colors and brands. So often, we can look at those types of things and give you information, be like, hey, these guys are legit. And if they say they stole your data, they stole your data.
Got it.
Or we may say this is just a run of the mill, extortion email that they probably blasted out to 100,000 companies. And then you look at other pieces like, okay, so how did they know I used that database? Or there may be another piece of information where they have a username plus the database. And then you have to say to yourself, whoa, hold on a second. This is potentially a little bit more real right now. So you take in all of these pieces of data, and then you help your client, I'm talking as us, make decisions, right? What do you want to do next? So, but yes, reaching out to them, if you know what you're doing, is often a good approach.
So if I'm a client of Black Talon and I say, hey, Gary, look what I got here. Will you put us in touch with those investigative, companies to let us know whether or not, this is real or not? Is it something that Black Talon does themselves?
Sure. I mean, that's part of our business. So we've helped, tons of dental practices, ortho practices recover from ransomware. And we actually have a group of individuals that specialize in that. So we do the full recovery, negotiating with the hackers, analyzing the attack, making the Bitcoin payment. And as part of the Bitcoin payment, you actually have to do a background check with the US government, because you cannot transfer cryptocurrency to a nation state. So what happens if Iran hits your practice? It's happening now. Or North Korea, or the Bitcoin wallet is associated with a terrorist organization. And now you're like, I'm just an orthodontist, but I'm going to send $100,000 ransomware payment to this Bitcoin address, and you now get a knock on your door telling you, hey, you just transferred 100,000 in Bitcoin to a terrorist organization. You can't be like, I'm just an orthodontist. Like, that doesn't work.
So if you say to them, hey, I was hit with ransomware and I needed to pay it, that's not good enough. Will they ever actually prosecute you, or will they just drag you through the mud in a situation that you just wish you were never part of?
Yeah, so I think it has a lot to do with how much and really intent. But technically, it's the governing body is the Treasury Department, and the check is called an OFAC check, the Office of Foreign Asset Control. It's no different than you taking $100,000 and wiring it through an international wire. You're just doing it through crypto. But yes, you as the owner of the practice, you could be criminally liable for transmitting those funds. Do I know of a dental practice where the doctor was locked up for that? I do not.
That'd be crazy.
So yeah, look, you have to be careful, right? Or your IT vendor does it on your behalf and they don't understand the laws. Both of you, could be, pulled into a pretty nasty investigation. Nothing you want to ever be involved in. So
my question for you is, before we get to my final question, which I'd asked you about, which was related to Russia, Ukraine, tell me anything else that I may have forgotten here, anything you wanted to talk about, anything you wanted to go through, any other suggestions or things you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, so I think there's one key component to security that a lot of folks don't really think about and that's third party, right? So what I say to every orthodontist that says, well, my IT company has me, I'm secure, I say to them, well, how do you actually know that? Not in technical terms, but how do you actually know that? And I'll ask them, do you receive reports every month from your IT vendor showing you, A, all the holes in your security, and then B, that they're actually being fixed? Right. And I rarely, if ever, get a positive response. And I think that's when the orthodontist starts saying, all right, I think I understand what you're talking about. So having a third-party cyber company like ours come in and work hand in hand with your IT company to constantly analyze the computers and firewalls to determine where you're vulnerable, where hackers are going to breach. That's the most important thing you can do, right? The risk here, and I'm not being dramatic, but the risk here is substantial, right? It's probably, one of the most riskier endeavors that you can deal with because, malpractice is covered, fire is covered, things like that. But when you get hit with ransomware, it's life-changing. You talk to many orthodontists, and we had a good discussion about a year and a half ago with one of your colleagues, Dr. Krieger, where she was hit with ransomware shortly after buying a practice, and she basically said, "I'm done. I'm done being an orthodontist. Like I can't deal with this." Yeah, she had the FBI in her office, trying to resolve it, and she just said, "I give up. It's nothing I ever imagined happening to me," and the impact was so damaging, emotionally and mentally and everything. For weeks, she thought she may have lost her entire livelihood. And this is very common. It doesn't matter if you're in practice for 6 months, or 6 years. You're literally watching your practice, disappear in front of you. You can't control it, right? As much as we want to control what's happening, you can't. You're dealing literally with criminals that are in foreign countries that are hiding behind computers and networks. So I think by implementing a third party like a cyber firm to analyze your network and tell you where you have risk, and then you as the orthodontist getting to make decisions on how to address that risk is really where it's at. And frankly, outside of the dental space, this is how almost all businesses function, right? They work with an IT company plus cyber because they want to know for a fact, hey, am I secure? Am I not? And if I'm not, what do I need to do to get secure? Instead of just doing like kind of what you said, which is the firewall and the antivirus, which is what everyone has. It doesn't work anymore, right? Yeah. It's just not effective. But
it makes perfect sense to me. And again, I totally sympathize with that colleague of mine, who I don't know, by the way, everybody.
Okay.
It's heartbreaking because as orthodontists, it used to be, as any healthcare provider, it used to be just do your ortho, do your healthcare, do what you got to do, give your best outcome. Now from staff, just in this 45 minutes that we've been together, we've talked about the FBI, we've talked about the Treasury Department, we've talked about your own employee mining Bitcoin. I mean, like, these were not problems that existed even 20 years ago, 10 years ago. Right. Like, this is crazy what we're living in. So before we finish this, I have to get back to my question now, Gary.
Yeah.
And I know we could do this for hours.
We could, right?
But knowing that the majority of the attacks are coming right now against us are coming from Russia or Ukraine, what happened when the Ukrainian conflict started? Has it increased because they needed more money? Has it decreased? What's been going on and why?
So it's really interesting. I will say most of us in the intelligence community actually believe that when the wars kicked off, those two countries would start leveraging their technology to launch more ransomware attacks to generate revenue. That actually never happened. So basically what happened was a lot of the Ukrainians, right, understand that it wasn't the Ukrainian government attacking US businesses. It was individuals inside of that country.
And is it really a large percentage of attacks do actually come from Ukraine?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Man, yeah, so Russia. When I gave charity, I could have been funding my Ukrainian.
Exactly. Yeah.
Nice.
Look, it's a bunch of bad apples, right? That's the reality of it.
We're taking over your computers, and by the way, thank you for the generous donation.
Yes. Thank you. And in a few months, you will be sending us tons of military equipment. Yeah. So basically, what happened is a lot of the Ukrainian hackers turned their negative energy conceptually, right, and became very patriotic and used their hacking capabilities to launch offensive strikes, against Russia, or used them to help defend Ukrainian government and Ukrainian military from these attacks. So what we instantly saw was a decrease from attacks coming or emanating from Ukraine. And then Russia seems to have grabbed a lot of their hackers and said, hey, you're going to be working for the Russian government now, and you're going to be using your skills to attack Ukraine. So it was very interesting because we would get numerous calls per week, ransomware, cyber events. And then literally the days into the war, the phones weren't ringing. And then a couple of weeks, I was getting phone calls from law firms that we work with saying, hey, what's going on? Are you guys like not sending us business? Or none of the cyber firms are really, reporting a lot of attacks. I said, our emergency line is dead. Right. And
which is a great thing.
Yeah, right. We don't like to see this, right? This is the most horrific thing, you could deal with in kind of business world. Obviously, life is different. But when you watch a business being ripped apart because of these events, it's nothing that you ever want a business owner to go through. But yeah, look, they died off dramatically. I would say for about 3 months, there was nothing going on. And then all of a sudden, they started coming back. Now, the interesting thing is they started coming from different parts of the world that we weren't seeing before. Now, the U.S. government, Homeland Security and CISA announced, and actually it was a joint statement, Homeland Security, CISA, FBI, Secret Service announced that Iran has now joined the ransomware game. So that's a problem because they weren't really doing ransomware previously, but they saw a hole, right? Russia, Ukraine are kind of going at it. And they're like, oh, no one's doing this ransomware stuff. So let's jump into that. And then North Korea is now into the ransomware game as well. So like anything, when one criminal group is exits or is brought down, someone else will typically step up. Drug war, terrorism, right, things like that. It's very, very similar in the cyber world. So with that being said, Iran launches attacks against U.S. businesses. They're a nation state. How do you make that payment now? It's going to be very interesting to see what happens. And typically you can, unless you get certain approvals from the U.S. government to make that payment. Right. So you can be an ortho practice.
In cryptocurrency, because it's know your customer.
That's right.
Know your client, right? It basically, you need to jump through some hurdles to open a cryptocurrency account. They need to know who you are, which is how crypto started, with not ever having to answer to anybody. It's kind of funny how it's gone the other direction, where in order to be able to fund a payment, they need to know who's sending the payment and from where. But so it's impossible for somebody to accidentally do it, right?
Yep. So it's an issue. So you're just an innocent orthodontist who gets hit, and it's determined that it is a threat group from Iran. Can't really make the payment, right? The Treasury Department is probably going to say no. So you could lose everything. You have no choice, right? You're going to start with a zero database or zero patients in your database. So that's an issue. We actually, I know we're out of time, but we actually had this occur to not an ortho practice, a GP practice in Southern California, where Treasury Department denied the payment because there was a nexus to a terrorist organization. And the GP had to take 100% data loss, x-rays, digital charts, health history forms, and they had to start all over. Yeah. Wow. So it's like things you just don't even think about. Right. And then insurance often won't cover it. So Lloyd's of London, you can Google this, has come out and publicly said if it's determined that it was a nation state or an act of war, you probably won't have cyber coverage, even if you have a policy, because it's going to be an exclusion. So one of the things we talk about a lot is things don't always happen the way you think they're going to happen. Right. I'm in the cloud, and then they get into your workstations. Or the other thing is they get into your workstations and they use your browsing history to look at the web address for your cloud technology. Guess what? They click on it. It brings you to the cloud login screen, and Stacy at the front desk has saved her username and password into the browser. And all they do is hit login. Because the browser inserts the username and password, they get right into your Ortho cloud technology. But they're using your office's computer to do it. So often we think, oh, it's going to be a direct hack against the cloud technology, but no, they basically took a slightly different route, to get in.
Yeah. Truly amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I always love chatting with you. I'm looking forward to seeing you on stage, talking about these sorts of things next year at Summit. I think it'll be great. Every time you've ever shared any of this information, I know people love it. I wish we didn't have to hear it, but You're like Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men, right? You know, because deep in places we don't want to talk about at cocktail parties. We need you on that wall, right?
No doubt. No
Yeah.
doubt.
So, but thank you so much for everything you're doing. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to Gary. How's the best way to reach you if they want to?
Sure. Hit me up on email. Simple. It's Gary@blacktalonsecurity.com. I'm all over LinkedIn. You know, hit me there also on IM, whatever works best for you.
Fantastic.
So, yep.
Well, looking forward to seeing you next year. Thank you for all you're doing, and just thanks for being on here today.
You got it. Appreciate it. Hope everyone learned something.